Welcome into Basketball by Association. I'm Joel Cordes. Arky Shea has the week off yet again. Keep slacking, Arky. That's okay, because that means we get to bring in friend of the show and longtime broadcasting pal back for a second week in a row, Dan Lewig, joining us here on BBA. Dan, I'm excited to talk hoops with you again.
Yeah, I haven't been banned yet. This might be getting to be a record at this point. So
there's a first time for everything. Before we get into it, this is going to be a trade destination type of show. We are deep, obviously, into the off season, and a lot of the smoke has settled down. A lot of the movement has settled down, but there's still three big names out there. So we're going to talk very heavily on Kevin Durant. We will get to some of the rumored destinations and break those down, the likelihood of those. But for almost every of the rumored destinations, I'm going to throw out an alternative that's very similar in feel, and we'll kind of weigh very speculatively whether that would work or not, why or why not, and whether that team could or should get into the mix. We'll talk about Kyrie Irving a little bit, a name that we have talked about way too much on this show, and whether there are any destinations that make sense for Kyrie. I'm on record as having said that it makes the most sense for him to stay in Brooklyn. Is that still really true if Durant leaves? We'll talk about that. And then, of course, Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz, another young superstar, or at least star, depending on how you want to classify him. His name has been in the trade rumors ever since Rudy Gobert got moved to the Minnesota Timberwolves in that mega deal, which prompted you and I, Dan, to spend the most minutes on this show consecutively in history talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves. And we, of course, are 114 episodes in to this iteration of Basketball by Association, which means before we go any further, we've got to name the episode. And we've been doing it ever since we crossed episode 100. We've been naming it off of players and their playoff games. There is actually only one player in NBA history who has ever had 114 playoff games right on the nose. And so by default, but there's no shame in this, because if you were an 80s or 90s NBA aficionado, you know this player. I doubt there's many people out there who were a huge fan of this guy, because just kind of an obscure type of player, but he's a three-time All-Star. He was on the 94-95 All-NBA team and a two-time sixth man of the year. And if you were a Bulls fan, you saw him in the NBA Finals against your Bulls in 95-96. This is the Detlef Schrempf episode, the precursor, of course, to Dirk Nowitzki, the first German star, not superstar, but star in the NBA, a guy who did average 19 points a couple of times in his career, usually around the 16, 17 points per game mark. Started out with 3.5 seasons in Dallas before going to the Indiana Pacers. Did 3.5 seasons there. Probably most well-known, at least people of our age, again with the Seattle Supersonics, 5 years as the front court mate with Shawn Kemp. And like I said, made a couple of all-star teams while he was there, wound up his career in the Pacific Northwest as well on the Portland Trail Blazers. That very infamous, famous team, they were loaded, that ran into the Lakers and some of those phantom Tim Donaghy calls, a weird series where the Blazers, Damon Stoudemire, Steve Smith, Detlef Schrempf, Scottie Pippen, Brian Grant, Arvydas Sabonis, Rasheed Wallace. There's a few other names on there. Steve Kerr on that team. They were absolutely loaded as far as late 90s, early 2000 teams go, and they couldn't beat the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. A lot of conspiracy talk after that about the league wanting the Lakers and nobody else in the finals. So we won't go down that rabbit hole. Detlef Schrempf, this episode is for you. Let's swing over to a different forward, and a name that has been at the top of the headlines, Kevin Durant, since the offseason began, about will he stay, won't he stay. James Harden has already left. Then it was Kyrie's going to go. Then Kyrie is going to sign and restay. And now it sounds like Durant wants to leave. And let's start with the biggest name, the biggest rumor first, Dan. And that's the Phoenix Suns, who seemed to be in that mix and seemed to be logical up until the point that DeAndre Ayton was just re-signed out of restricted free agency. The Suns matched the offer that was given by the Indiana Pacers, $133 million, 4 years. That seemed right for the Suns to do. And because of that, Now the rumor that's out there is Mikal Bridges and a bunch of picks, but the Suns haven't even reportedly offered that. Dan, this seems dead in the water. If you were the Suns, would you even offer Bridges and picks for Durant if you could get him? To me, this made more sense if you were ditching DeAndre Ayton, a player that you were going to lose anyway.
Yeah, the premise on this one was that Ayton was just available as a tradable asset, sign and trade element to it. That's what made the most sense with Phoenix. What I noted very quickly was when the Pacers sent the offer, how quickly the Suns matched. I think that was noted. Some thought it could go closer to the wire or more thought to it. They matched it very quick. And I think that kind of speaks volumes to how they feel about Ayton as being part of the core of this team, and kind of clarified that as far as people wondering, did they really want him? Did they not? Was he better as a tradable asset? Was he someone that they felt could be part of their core moving forward? I think the way they addressed it spoke volumes in that regard and takes them out of the equation. Now, would you or would I, if Mikal Bridges and picks to do that? Maybe, but I think the Ayton kind of solidifies the direction that they want to go, and I don't think that direction now has Durant in the picture.
Yeah, it certainly opens the window up youth-wise. There was all sorts of rumors about whether Ayton was getting along with Monty Williams, whether he was mature enough. The Suns, you and I talked about this off air last week. There was certainly a lot of smoke around the Phoenix Suns and what they were not doing with Ayton. You have a number one pick who's up for extension. You can conceivably get him for cheaper if you just extend him than letting him hit unrestricted free agency. And then you've got to offer the 5-year completely full max deal instead of just that extension by the 4 years, making it a 5-year deal, essentially, with this year's on top of it. They didn't do that. And they seemed comfortable, like you said, with giving another team's version, so an outside team's version of a max deal. Because again, NBA rules, when you're on your own team, you get an extra year, you get an extra, not only the extra year of money, but an extra percentage of money on top of that. Phoenix was never comfortable because they didn't offer that. It was clear they felt they'd be bidding against themselves when the Pacers were willing to give a max deal, but at that lower threshold, Phoenix said that's good enough. And so, yeah, they're younger. They can't trade Ayton now until halfway through the season, this next season, January 1st. If I'm the Suns and I could get Durant for Mikal Bridges, as much as I like Bridges and as much as he's an all-star, the opportunity to pair up Durant and Chris Paul and Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, knowing that your window is still open enough that conceivably, unless you're trading picks 7-8 years down the line, you're still probably only giving mid-round to low first-round picks up for Durant. If I could swing that, I would. If I'm the Brooklyn Nets, things have got to be getting a little bit desperate if I'm signing off on that one. Bridges does look like he's got all-star potential. And the possibility of pairing him with Ben Simmons, who I know a lot of the luster is worn off of Simmons at this point, but putting those two together at the forwards and the defensive potential that you have there and the upside that Bridges has shown as an offensive player, that's really enticing. But granted, Bridges has shown that offensive upside playing with Chris Paul, spoon-feeding him, and Devin Booker taking that lion's share of the defensive attention, with DeAndre Ayton taking a lot of the other stuff. So is Bridges really a star caliber player? Yes, he'd have a nice distributor in Ben Simmons, but again, I'm not sure I go for that one. The other name here, if we're going to talk about contenders, and the Phoenix Suns, they were reportedly on Kevin Durant's list, and why not? They've been to the NBA Finals. They've been in that hunt. They're clearly on the rise. This other team, though, makes even more sense. The door would theoretically still be open to make this type of deal, but this comes with such a massive amount of baggage. And that, of course, is the Golden State Warriors, a team that Durant already played for, and you can see the air quotes, sold out for to go chase a championship. And yet the Warriors, fresh off another title without Durant, are loaded in a sense that would be conceivably enticing to Durant if he could bury the hatchet, and would have to be pretty enticing to the Brooklyn Nets. Dan, I'm gonna float this to you first to riff on this one.
I don't see Durant willing to get his nice fine china out, get his nice bib on, get the nice plate right there, and start scooping up that slice of humble pie. I don't see it happening because not only, like, think of what this means if he would actually do this. If he goes to Golden State, and just looking at it from Durant's perspective and from Golden State's perspective, he now has to be second fiddle to anything else going on in that locker room because he left that locker room. There was issues within it. Draymond Green, everything else was there. Some of that dirty laundry came out. Coming back into this, even more so now because of that, he has to just go along with what is there. Now, again, that's a winning clubhouse, winning everything else. That's him saying, I'm done with like my taste of Brooklyn and what other locker rooms can be. Now means I'm just going to sit there, go out and win a championship. That's it. Now, if he wants to do that, there's no better place to go than Golden State. But what it would mean by doing this, I don't see him doing that. Now, as far as a trade package, it makes sense as far as the young buildable assets. There's not one necessarily key star coming back, but as far as building a playoff caliber roster or building towards it with younger players, and then Ben Simmons being your key guy leading within that, it's definitely intriguing from a Brooklyn standpoint. You'd be taking a step backwards, but with an intentional step forward planned with the young players and assets coming back. But I don't see Durant signing off.
Yeah, and let's talk about those assets for a moment. Because of the contract matching, Andrew Wiggins almost certainly has to be involved because you're not going to trade Klay Thompson. And it would be unfortunate to see Wiggins done that way after everything that he did for the Warriors in getting them to the championship, but also playing the good soldier role last year, 2 years ago at this point, when everybody was hurt and Wiggins was kind of the guy keeping them afloat and competitive. At least they were in the play-in hunt throughout much of the season. But Wiggins has the salary. He still has the youth and the upside to be a part of that. You're going to start any package around him, but then you've got some really interesting options. You've got James Wiseman, a top 3 pick at the center position, a guy who I think could play with Ben Simmons phenomenally well. I see Wiseman, honestly, as once he's healthy and gets that chance to develop, as the rich man's version of DeAndre Ayton. You've got Jonathan Kuminga, a guy that the Warriors thought very, very highly of. They brought up and drafted out of the G League. He has shown some major flashes that he's got starter potential in this league, potentially something more. The only consideration there is he plays the same position as Ben Simmons, which is power forward, unless you're going to move Ben Simmons back to a point guard role like the Philadelphia 76ers did. You probably do that if you're the Nets and you're moving on from Kyrie Irving. We'll get to them in a little bit. Then you've got your choice. I think one, but not both of these guys would be involved. Either Jordan Poole, who really has stepped up and shown that he's got 6 man of the year potential, probably starter potential in the league, maybe even more than that. And Moses Moody, a guy who, as a rookie last year, showed he's got the NBA body, he's got the NBA skill set for a shooting guard, and a lot of potential. It's just a little more uncertainty than Jordan Poole, but you're gonna craft a package out of that. And you don't, this is what's so beautiful about this option. You don't even necessarily need a boatload of draft picks. Not that they really matter because the Warriors are going to be so good for a while that these are low draft picks. But the one consideration if I'm the Warriors, beyond do I bring Durant back into this? Does he sour on it quickly? We already saw that he was willing to say, yep, I got my rings, I'm going to move on. Do you want to get back into that? Is Draymond Green cool with it? Is Steve Kerr cool with it? They can talk all they want positively in the media, but are they really, truly deep down cool with the idea of Durant coming back if it was even on the table? But what you are doing is taking your window of the Warriors and you're shrinking it down to the next 3 years. You are hitching your wagons to Curry, Thompson, Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, Kevon Looney, which is what you were doing before Durant left, but that was 3 years ago already at this point, 3-4 years ago. So the window has come down to veterans only and whatever other ring chasers you can get. You are resetting back in time. Whereas right now, you've got all those young guys that I mentioned. And while we don't know if there's any Hall of Famers hiding amongst that group of 4 youngsters, again, Moody, Poole, Wiggins, and Wiseman. Wiggins has got the best chance at this point. We don't know, but there's enough upside there to let your veterans age gracefully and start to slowly over the next few seasons diminish their minutes, diminish their roles without having to diminish their impact. And that is the beauty of those disaster seasons that the Warriors suffered over the last couple years, because they were able to restock with young talent. Of course, it remains to be seen if you can pay all those guys and keep all those guys, because if they get too good too fast, they're going to get poached away and you're back to having an old team without them. So a lot that's on the table. And like you've said, Dan, I don't know that Durant, who has shown very much over the last few years, and while I respect his willingness to bet on himself, to be clear about what he wants, to be unapologetic about what he wants, he has not been a guy who's like been, hey, read between the lines and like super passive aggressive about it. He's been fairly open. He's wanted his cake and he wants to eat it too. So to go back and to take his legacy, he chafed under the idea that he was a ring chaser and a second banana in Golden State, and that somehow his rings meant less because he was there. To go back and, like you said, make that final admittance that, no, I can't do it without the Warriors. I am a first ballot Hall of Famer, but a second banana legacy-wise, I don't see him doing that either. I just don't. Maybe in a few years down the line, especially if he got a ring somewhere else, he reunites with those guys for like one last go-round, but I don't see it. We've got one other contender here who I think is a longer than long shot compared to the other two, but let's talk about them anyway, because they always seem to weasel their way into these conversations. And no, it's not the New York Knicks. No, it's not the Los Angeles Lakers. They have no chance to get Durant whatsoever because they're not willing to give up the massive stars that they have in the case of LA, and New York doesn't have the capital to get them. This other team I don't think really has the capital either, but yet they're still in this conversation. That's the Miami Heat. I am not sure how or why this one has any traction unless the Heat were coming to the table to Brooklyn and saying, look, Bam Adebayo is available. And if I'm the Nets, I pick up that phone and I listen and I have a real long conversation about that. But if Bam's not on the table, which reportedly he is, untouchable in Miami, I don't see how Miami has anything, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero included, that Brooklyn wants, right?
I would agree. And I think the conversation begins and ends with Bam. And contrary to what the media has said so far, I think he could be on the table. I think this is the type of player, this is the type of move that Riley loves. And understanding everything that Bam is, I think the idea of pairing Durant with Butler and being able to keep the majority of that core, because you're talking about maybe Bam, Hero, and a bunch of picks, right? That would essentially be what the trade is. I mean, if you're Pat Riley, do you say no to that?
Probably not. But you, again, are then having to sort out a whole lot of other questions, a whole lot of other issues with the roster. If you keep Butler, you've got Oladipo, you conceivably have Lowry, you're going to find somebody to play center. That can be done. Center is, while very underrated in the NBA right now, there's a lot of people who still want to say that, centers are dead, and that's absolutely not true. It is, I think, doable enough to find spot starters at this point. It's maybe a little late in the off season to do that.
Some teams even want 2 of them.
Speaking of the Minnesota Timberwolves, we'll get to them in just a moment. But yeah, I don't see how Miami's offer without Bam is as enticing as any of the teams that have been rumored or that we're going to speculate about in order to get something like this done. If Bam is included, that changes things enormously. Speaking of teams that are... Go ahead.
My last part on when it comes to the Miami Heat, the reason why I think they're more than just a dark horse is because there is no other clear-cut option where it makes sense, and that allows someone like Pat Riley to come together with a package that maybe wouldn't win in a different year. But if he's willing to include Bam within it, which is obviously where the conversation begins and ends, but if he is, that moves you to the front of the table versus maybe just one of the other offers. So I think it allows more possibilities there in Miami.
So we've talked about clear-cut contenders and the types of destinations that a too cool for school guy like Kevin Durant reportedly would be interested in. There's a handful of other, we'll call them quasi-contenders that are in the mix, some of whom have been rumored, some of whom have not, but that I want to bring up because I think these make more sense. But the big question becomes, would Kevin Durant be willing to humble himself to play in places like this, which are not traditional hot spots? One that I want to bring up because I think they're analogous to the Miami Heat, and they're often very active like Miami. They're just not quite as far along as contenders, but they're not very far off, and that's the Dallas Mavericks. The idea of pairing Durant and Luka together is so enticing, but does Dallas have anything that a rebuilding Brooklyn Nets would want while still being able to keep Luka? Because, of course, you're not ever going to get rid of Doncic at this point in his career. I would say even for Durant, if he were on the table. I'm sorry, as much as Christian Wood shows that potential as a 20 and 10 guy, maybe an all-star, and as much as the Nets probably would be okay with bringing Spencer Dinwiddie back, that's not enough to move the needle on a package, and Dallas would conceivably be good enough, not a clear-cut, favorite in the West, but good enough to mean that their draft capital, whatever they give up, is not going to move that needle either, because it's going to be middling picks. I don't see the Dallas Mavericks as a viable option. But Dan, I do want to throw a different team from the West, a different D named team for you, and that's the Denver Nuggets. Because if you could start a trade package around Michael Porter Jr. and Bones Highland and any of the other young guys that Brooklyn found intriguing, I'm even willing to build, Aaron Gordon is out there. I'm even willing to talk a package built around Jamal Murray instead of Michael Porter Jr., or maybe the two of them, but obviously fewer of the other young guys and draft picks at that point. The idea of pairing Kevin Durant with a delivery system like Nikola Jokic, a guy who truly, I think Jokic does not want to be the number one option as a scorer, but is more than overqualified to be your number two option, and then some. I honestly have a hard time finding too many better fits, although there's going to be a couple out there, and that includes the Phoenix Suns that we talked about, and that includes the Golden State Warriors, who on the court it makes so much sense, but all of that off-court baggage. Denver just seems phenomenal to me if they could get enough pieces that the Brooklyn Nets want. It's just, is that the kind of place that Kevin Durant is going to go for? But then again, Kevin Durant has kind of been willing to flip the script so far in his career a couple of times, including small marketplaces like the Oklahoma City Thunder, where he did stay for a long portion of his career.
This is the true test of who Kevin Durant is now that he has a choice. Right now, you can say for some of that in Oklahoma, he did have a choice.
Yeah,
he didn't just bolt at first opportunity. But since then, what he has wanted is what he saw the rest of the NBA stars doing. He wanted to go with proven veteran superstars. He wanted a big three, and that's what led him to Golden State. Then he got upset with the dynamics there and went to go build his own big three. That tanked, and now this would be if his words, if his actions aligned with his words, then you would say Denver makes all the sense in the world, because here is him coming in as the guy with the rest of the pieces around him, and it can become Durant's team.
Or at very worst, he's 1B, right? At very worst, he's 1B.
And I don't think there's a lot of egos there from Jokic and others as far as if it became publicly, or at least the media took it as Durant's team, no one would boff at that. But this doesn't match what Durant has been looking for. And the problem is what he wants, as far as this offseason goes, the only one that makes sense in that realm is the one place he left. So it becomes harder to do unless Miami comes knocking where it works. I said, Denver's a fantastic fit. First and foremost, it is a fantastic fit for both sides. I think it does work for them. It works for Brooklyn in a lot of the same ways of the young talent coming back from Golden State. You're getting very similar in this regard, and perhaps better as far as where they're at in their development right now.
Especially if you can get
think it makes a
Jamal
ton of
Murray
sense.
and Michael Porter Jr. If you could get both of those guys, if you're the Nets, you've got Murray as a flamethrower scoring guard, but not necessarily a distributor. But that's why you have Ben Simmons. And then you have Porter Jr. as another lanky forward, a switch forward to play up front with Simmons, and you're going to piece out the rest of the roster around them. I love that idea for Denver. There's another team that I loved, but like the Phoenix Suns, I think the ship has sailed. I'm going to touch on them real quick, and then we'll get to some others where the window might be open. Prior to trading for DeJounte Murray from the San Antonio Spurs, the Atlanta Hawks, to me, were as enticing for Durant as the Denver Nuggets would have been, and even as enticing as the Phoenix Suns would have been, because conceivably you could pair him around or with Trae Young. But in moving and acquiring DeJounte Murray and giving up some picks as part of that, yes, they didn't give up players. So the Hawks maybe could try to work something in here, but I don't know if the pieces are there yet, because Murray would not be available for trade yet, and you would have to think he would be a part of that. I don't know if John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, they don't even have Kevin Huerter now, who they moved to the Sacramento Kings or allowed to go to the Sacramento Kings. I don't know that Hunter and Collins move the needle enough. To me, that's the sort of deal as if I'm looking at a Tyler Hero type of package from Miami. It feels like 60 cents on the dollar. It's not terrible if you're concerned that Durant is going to hold you hostage, but that doesn't seem to be a viable concern at this point. And Clint Capella doesn't move the needle there, although maybe Onyeka Okongwu does if Brooklyn really loves him at the center spot. So don't count out the Hawks in this conversation. They've shown that they will be aggressive. Bogdanovic is still there, but a little bit old to be kind of an upside piece. It really depends on whether Brooklyn goes, hey, we're just going to retool rather than rebuild. I don't see that one happening there. However, the next couple of teams, you and I, again, talked about a lot off air last week as far as the upside of this for everybody involved. And let's send this over to a place we spent a lot of time on last week, but not on this topic. And that's the Minnesota Timberwolves. You made a really interesting point. I don't remember if it was during the show or after the show about how Minnesota, yes, they're doing everything to insulate Karl Anthony Towns and to expand and maximize him. And that's the whole idea behind bringing Rudy Gobert in. But in some ways, they've turned the screws on Towns too, because if he doesn't improve defensively, if he flames out in the playoffs again, like he did last season, a couple of times very conspicuously, they've got his replacement at the center spot and the ability to move Karl Anthony Towns. And you and I were talking about the fact that if you're the Brooklyn Nets, there are very few young superstar level players that you could get back right now in a Durant level deal that you could build around and that you would feel fairly confident, warts and all, building around. And they'd be gettable. And if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves and you have the opportunity, I know Towns is part of your cornerstone, but Anthony Edwards is your cornerstone now. How quickly do you pull the trigger if Durant became available?
Let's ask this way, and you can say it for both sides. If the deal was out there of a Durant for Cat straight up, who says no?
I don't think either team should. If I'm Brooklyn, I maybe try to get one of the other younger players thrown in, a pick thrown in, what have you. Remember, Karl Anthony Towns is from the New Jersey area, so you've got the homecoming aspect of it. You're going to pair him up front with Ben Simmons, who gives you that defensive.
Who Minnesota tried to pair up with.
Yep.
In previous off seasons.
Yes, the Towns-Simmons pairing is really intriguing for a lot of reasons. You still have Kyrie Irving there, and you can do what you want, whether it's keeping him and rebooting around that or moving Irving and trying to find other guard options. So if I'm Brooklyn, I don't say no to this. Cat is a better player than Bam Adebayo. Cat's a better player than DeAndre Ayton. He's a better player than Andrew Wiggins, even though Wiggins was, more successful in the playoffs. I don't think there's a name yet that we've come across. Jamal Murray, Michael Porter, there's not a name yet that we've mentioned that's better than Towns. And if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves saying, Anthony Edwards, look, we're going to move heaven and earth to make this happen, and you have the ability to trot out D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert now, Durant up front, so you're going to protect Durant while not having quite as big of a concern about too many bigs on the floor at once, and then whoever you want at small forward, whether that's Taurean Prince or Kyle Anderson or Jaden McDaniels. As much as I love Cat and as much as he has soldiered his way through some really tough years in Minnesota and now is right on the cusp of seeing that hard work pay off, and generally, despite some boneheaded play on the court, the guy's kept his nose clean. He's said all the right things about being loyal to Minnesota. So there is something to be said for that. As much as all of that has to be taken into account, I wouldn't say no either if I'm the Minnesota Timberwolves.
First and foremost, I do want to point out that when it comes to the theme of Minnesota, welcome to the big leagues type of thing, I do have to also point out with this type of move, this is also the BBA welcome to the big leagues moment, because, talking Minnesota powerhouse sports right. is exactly where we are now. So when it comes down to looking at the classics, for that was a keeper. That was the turning point here. It's definitely the last two episodes have definitely brought onto that wellness. So I'm glad that BBA is jumping up a notch in its coverage there for that. So I think that only bodes well for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. One other young up-and-coming team who is a playoff team, which is why I put them in a different category than one other that I'll mention here in a minute, who actually has been rumored. Minnesota has not been rumored for this, and the issue, of course, is Durant going to accept being in a small market like Minnesota, which is akin to going to Oklahoma City. But like the Oklahoma City Thunder did back during Durant's stint there, Minnesota has made it very clear that they want to contend. And Oklahoma City did not trot the checkbook out to keep that group intact when it all came, time. They let Harden go. They let Ibaka go. There was only so much they could do in that, but Minnesota has shown they want to spend. This other team, though, has got pieces. I don't think quite as attractive as sending Karl Anthony Towns out, but what Durant would be walking into, I think could be as attractive, maybe even more so. But would he be willing to play in a place like New Orleans where you could build a trade package around Brandon Ingram, the guy who has been compared to a younger version of Durant for a while and just really came into his own over these last 2 years? A package of Brandon Ingram, probably Herb Jones, although the New Orleans Pelicans would love to keep an all-NBA defender in the making like Jones, who in his rookie season was just phenomenal. But you probably got to get rid of him too. You've got CJ McCollum in the mix there, probably staying. Devontae Graham, I'm sure, has to go in the deal. But you've got other young pieces like Jackson Hayes or Najee Marshall. You've got Jonas Valanciunas if Brooklyn wants a veteran center. You've got all of the, Trey Murphy showed upside last year. Kyrie Lewis Jr. showed upside before he got hurt. You have got so many different pieces to put around. Yeah, and a bunch of picks to put around Ingram to make a really attractive offer. And if you're Kevin Durant, you're walking onto a team with, yes, the question mark of all question marks in Zion Williamson. But the beauty of this is New Orleans does not clear the decks or their coffers to bring you in around Zion. You still are going to have enough pieces there to be really intriguing. A coach in Willie Green who is just universally respected around the league. It's really attractive, and to me on that same level as Minnesota.
What I like about it, and what the key for Durant would be saying this first year can still be a playoff contention year, but you're building this for year 2, right? Because you have guys where you have cap space, so now you can recruit your within. Like this would be the place where Durant goes to say, in the second half of my career, this is where I'm building my legacy. This is where I'm building my team within it. You already have Zion is already there. You already have a huge centerpiece to work with, but you have a ton of other developmental and already good players to work with there. So as far as building out the team, one of the challenges of a big 3 typically is having enough depth. You already have enough things started there where in another off season's time, you can go out and recruit and add the next big piece you need to truly put yourself in contention while still being one of the more exciting teams in the NBA in this first year. So it's a matter of, again, it goes back to what does Kevin Durant want his second half of his career to look like?
Which is why there's a few other small market teams that are just not going to be good enough, even with Durant on them, and or don't have the trade assets to land him. One of these has been rumored. One of these was speculated by its own player, or at least put on the wish list. And we're going to touch on them real quick. But before we do that, I just want to mention a dream pairing for me that I would love to see, but it's probably not going to happen, is the Milwaukee Bucks. And this is simply because Brooklyn likely is going to be in rebuild mode if they get rid of Durant, even if they've got Kyrie for one more year. But if they looked at this and said, no, we think we can put together a very solid starting 5 and compete and see what happens. Could you get Durant for Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, and then probably some combination of Brook Lopez or Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Grayson Allen, somebody else is in that mix plus picks? I don't think that's sexy enough for Brooklyn, but you could put together a really, really good starting 5 with Ben Simmons and Kyrie still there, or whatever else you move to build. It's just brand new starting 5s without a clear superstar, unless you believe that Kyrie can be that guy and is willing to be that guy, and you're willing to roll the dice on that. That's a scary proposition. But just the thought of Durant and Giannis together is so fun. But Milwaukee would have to clear out so much to make that happen. It gets really dicey depth-wise. Really, really dicey. So I'm not sure I see that one. It's a similar reason to why, like, the New York Knicks isn't going to happen. Sorry, Archie. They are in the mix for the next 2 players we'll talk about. But 2 other quasi, playoff contending teams that have been rumored. One who has gotten a lot of traction, I'm really surprised by this, the Toronto Raptors. You and I talked a lot about this last week off air as well. Toronto's got some really interesting pieces in their starting 5, but yet again, they're a perfect example of a team with a really good starting 5, no clear-cut superstar yet, depending on what happens with Scotty Barnes, even though Fred VanVleet is an all-star and Siakam's been an all-star. No clear-cut superstar, very questionable depth, which means not a lot of young prospects waiting in the wings. And they've been rumored because they could put together some interesting packages, but probably not if Scotty Barnes is untouchable. And if you're Durant and you're going to Toronto, are you a title contender there? And even if you were, are you going to stab the Raptors in the back like Kawhi Leonard did? I just don't see how this one is palatable to anybody involved, even though it's logical in a way that some of these other ones maybe aren't.
And I think that's why this is my favorite pick of potential landing spots.
Really?
Is because the logic does make sense. Because I still think you can get enough of a high ceiling player or quality enough of an all-star back, which again, we can't underestimate how much egg is on the face with Brooklyn with trying to put this together, that they need something from a PR mode as far as they're not going to do a full, complete teardown. It's definitely an option, and I think if you were really wanting to do this, you would, but with all the picks lost and things within this, I get the idea of we are looking for a way to retool around this if we trade him, and more than what the Milwaukee package could offer, Toronto offers a higher ceiling on a centerpiece of a trade.
Younger upside players, yeah.
And also having all of its picks available to offer with it, where that becomes also attractive within it. Now, again, not worth as much when these are going to be end of first round type picks if everything goes well. But even Brooklyn knows not everything goes well when you even when you acquire a Kevin Durant. So you never know what the future may hold in that regard. But I like the centerpiece move there. And again, for both sides, I think it makes sense. It's why they're my most logical landing spot, why they're my favorite.
If Toronto is willing to put Scotty Barnes in the conversation, who, yeah, the Raptors might be overestimating by making him untouchable. He looks like he has a lot of upside. He might be a multi-time All-Star. Is he a Hall of Famer? No, but he's a lot cheaper than Durant right now, that's for sure. But if you could land Durant while keeping Fred VanVleet, and then one of OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, and you're going to round out the rest of the bench there, if I were the Raptors, I probably would do it. But I do have that bad taste in my mouth left from what happened with Kawhi Leonard. And if I can get Durant without having to give up Barnes, and then conceivably keeping VanVleet, because you could build a package around Anunoby and Siakam, some picks, and then one of Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher, or Precious Achiuwa. It just really matters whether Brooklyn, in the midst of a rebuild where they value those players who are all young, have varying levels of upside, and you've got the picks on top of it. And again, you have a decent foundation in Brooklyn still on a team that, again, was going to be built to contend. Let's not forget that Seth Curry and Joe Harris, both of whom were injured, but Royce O'Neal, who's been a starter and a defensive guy in the league, Patty Mills as a backup, TJ Warren, who they just signed, although he's been hurt forever, Nick Claxton, and then Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving. You've got some depth there to be a credible team with some flexibility. I have that conversation. Go ahead.
What I also like about it is the when you're putting this full package together, they have a whole variety of things they can offer depending upon where Brooklyn's interest is within. I'm intrigued by the whole thing. There is still depth there, as you're saying, where you're not gutting the team to do it. I say there's just so many things that make sense.
One team that is kind of in a similar boat but makes less sense, but it was out there only because Damian Lillard or one of his surrogates knows how to use Photoshop, and Lillard, who has re-upped in Portland, clearly wants some help. And I would love for Lillard to get that kind of help. I just don't know that this would happen. Lillard wants Kevin Durant in a Blazers uniform. That would be a lot of fun. That would make a lot of sense. But in the Western Conference, even having Lillard and Durant together on a team that has really botched their retooling around Lillard over the last couple seasons and doesn't have a lot of capital, I don't think they have the package to get Durant. And even if they did, what they have left over is not needle mover enough. Plus, it's small market. You have to start any deal around Anthony Simons. Brooklyn's not interested otherwise. But then they've really got to love Yusuf Nurkic, who re-signed. And so you may be waiting until those clear. So you're talking about a mid-season type of deal. They've got to really love Nasir Little, a guy who may or may not be an NBA starter. Gary Payton II, who comes over from the Warriors, who I think is in danger of being a disappointment moving out of the Golden State system. But other young guys, Greg Brown, Keon Johnson, Shadion Sharp, there's some prospects there, but we know nothing about the true upside of those prospects, and then some veteran guys like Josh Hart and Jeremy Grant, who on the right teams could be very, very attractive, but are not a cornerstone around Anthony Simons or with Simons to land Durant. I just don't see that one, so I'm going to move on. There is one other team on our list here, and we won't spend a ton of time because we want to talk about Kyrie for just a little bit. We want to get to we want to get to the Utah deal potentially with Donovan Mitchell. But this is one that you and I spitballed. And yes, they're small market. Yes, they're young and rebuilding, which is why, Durant wouldn't go to the Houston Rockets, for example, even though they've got a ton of different pieces that Brooklyn in a full rebuild should be really interested in. But to go to this place makes a lot of sense. would Durant have an open enough mind to realize how awesome this could be? And that is the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team with like 30 plus draft picks over the next 7 seasons or whatever it is. A lot of young prospects: Josh Giddey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Trey Mann, Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, Alexei Pokashevsky, Chet Holmgren now. Guys that you could put that, a few of them, not all of them even, just a few of them, plus that massive amount of draft capital that Sam Presti has been accumulating over the last few years. Bring Durant home. Let the young guys develop around him. Let them try to attract some other veteran help. I think you only have to get rid of 2 of those prospects in that type of deal, plus the massive amount of picks. No, you're not going to be a contender this year. But my goodness, Durant should think about this, right?
Yeah. Here's why this deal works, right? And some might say, like, really, as like you really see this, any possibility of this? Like, are we now scraping the bottom of the barrel? No, for this reason. If it goes again, we talked about it goes back to what Durant wants, right? If he's willing to consider a place where it's going to be my team, number one, who doesn't love him there? Even with the stuff that's happened coming back, we've already seen a different superstar go back home, right? So this has already happened in the last decade here in the NBA. So it definitely has a script that writes itself. You have an arsenal of picks, and it would be truly ironic, but this is also why you build that type of capital, is you now have that capital to go and get veterans, not even necessarily used for young players. But again, think of next off season, because that's where this all comes down to play. You have cap space, and you now have a whole different team where now you can recruit someone in, and whoever you can't recruit or wanting to include in within it, you have the treasure trove of draft picks to go and get another young veteran that you can add to that core. You could add 2 cornerstone pieces next offseason, very realistically, and still not give up everything that you have amassed putting this all together. So it's really up to Durant and what he wants. But if he's willing to consider the rebuild team, where in 1 year's time I'm looking at a potential legitimate contender when I'm the one leading it, if that's what he wants all along, why not go home and let the script write itself?
And yeah, the Thunder fans and organization was pissed when Durant left. They were pissed, but so were Cleveland Cavaliers fans, right? And
100%.
You took it as a sign of loyalty when LeBron came back. And I would see the same thing. The only question, of course, is the Thunder did have problems bringing in free agents because of how small and remote that market is. There was problems there when Durant was there. But granted, they also were on a very tight shoestring budget. If that still exists, that could be a concern. If Durant feels that he's burned. But then again, think of the way that LeBron James had issues with Dan Gilbert and Cavaliers ownership. And they were able to bury the hatchet, at least temporarily, to make that happen and make 4 NBA finals in a row. I do see a lot of similarities here, a lot of parallels to what the Thunder, in fact, I think the Thunder have a more attractive landing spot for Durant to come back to than LeBron did in coming back to Cleveland. It's just
absolutely.
He was able to recruit and conceivably help the Kevin Love deal happen. Kyrie was already going to be there and so forth. But
here's how the difference here, why this works, is because you said, again, there can be a challenge with free agency, right?
Yeah.
When you have a treasure trove of picks and you can trade for already guys under contract within it, they have an arsenal to go out and get anyone that is available where they can trump any offer out there for anyone looking to rebuild.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think that's the equalizer that Oklahoma City needs if they want to actually build this team again, with or without Durant. And I think that's going to be key within it. If you can't recruit guys there, this goes back to Minnesota, same way, then you need to be able to trade for a cornerstone piece that comes in with many years under contract to go with it. And I think that's a very key thing here. And if Oklahoma does emerge out of this, it's not going to just be from drafting right, though they've been doing some of that already pretty solid, but it's going to come from being able to trade for a guy to be that next piece to take that next step in the rebuild.
I'm Joel Cordes. He's Dan Lewig, filling in for Arky Shea this week on Basketball by Association. Check us out on YouTube, the video version. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell over there. The audio-only version you can find on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Let's move to very brief. Before
you jump into that, there's still one more team we need to discuss.
Oh,
and this is the it should be the obvious one, and it's the one. There's no Woj needed for this one. It's a team that makes a ton of sense. It's a team that Kevin Durant would sign off on. It's called the Brooklyn Nets. It's called the Brooklyn Nets.
Okay. Yeah,
he already signed off on them. Yeah. With it. I get the whole idea. I understand he's not a guy to mince words or just go out and complain to the media and then come back to it. So if he's saying he's done, there's a 99% chance he's done. But let's compare what Brooklyn is now to the other places where he could go. Because logic at some point does have to win out if your goal is to win a championship. And just a season ago, this was your hand-picked place. These were your hand-picked guys. And there was a lot of things that happened in this past year, some chaotic, some stuff turmoil within, but
injuries.
That same talent.
Yeah.
And then so injuries, right? So that's a key to me in this is if Ben Simmons healthy, you have him. We got past the full drama of trying to get him. He's here. Kyrie, when he was playing, looked good.
Yeah, and you played well together when you were able to play together.
If you're willing to pull a Tom Brady and reconsider your thoughts by the mid and end of an offseason, is there truly a place that is better for him than the Brooklyn Nets?
I think there are places that are better, but not by a landslide. And I would love to see them run this back for one more year because it was such a big experiment that Durant was the prime mover behind. And to give it a fair shake now that Kyrie is conceivably going to be able to play for a full season. Like you said, Simmons is there, but the other pieces, and I mentioned them already, you've got shooting and Patty Mills, Seth Curry, Joe Harris. You've got your defensive guy in Royce O'Neal. You've got some young upside in Nick Claxton at the center spot. I see what else I can add here during the offseason. I see what I can do at the trade deadline. I give this that fair shake. It's a really valid point. Let's say
one more
that,
year.
Go ahead.
That's all that would be my selling point. If I'm coming from Brooklyn saying, I get in another year's time, we will move you wherever you want to go. So if you give us one more year, one true shot at this, with guys healthy in a non-COVID environment, can we see what we got here? This is what we wanted to build. Have we truly seen what we've constructed? Give this 1 year, and then let's revisit.
Kyrie Irving is, on record as wanting to run it back. He's got a signature saying that he wants to run it back and try it. The timing was, of course, very, very curious that as soon as he said he wanted to commit and, the Nets were willing to work with him, that then Durant wanted out. That seems really petty when Durant was the guy who wanted Irving there. But let's say that Kyrie is going to get moved. You're not going to move Kyrie Irving to a young rebuilding team. You don't want him anywhere near your young players, anywhere near them. It doesn't make sense. So you're looking at contenders, but most contenders have their point guard spot kind of nailed down. But there are a few places where they don't. And the price for Kyrie Irving is going to be substantially lower than it would be to get Kevin Durant. So I'm going to throw out 4 contending teams who could use an upgrade at point guard, who most of them typically go big game hunting, and a couple of these have been rumored already. And out of these 4, I want you to tell me which one you like the best. Number 1, the Los Angeles Lakers. They've been rumored a whole bunch. Russell Westbrook would be involved. We've talked about that one on our show before. The Miami Heat, because they like to stick their nose in everywhere, in every type of deal. And let's face it, Kyrie Irving would be a massive upgrade over Kyle Lowry. Would Kyrie Irving be a Pat Riley type of guy? That becomes a major question. The New York Knicks, because, well, Archie Shea presumably is listening to this show and we have to humor him. Plus, Kyrie doesn't have to sell apartments to make it happen. And then the other big market team that I want to throw in here, who has not been rumored in any way, but I do think there is some sense to it, the Chicago Bulls, where there are some interesting pieces. Lonzo Ball's knee is in question. I am not a huge fan of the idea of Kyrie and Zach LaVine in the same backcourt. I actually like Ball or Caruso next to LaVine better, but let's just throw them in for giggles. Out of those four teams, who makes the most sense to you?
I think there's a lot to be said for. Let me back up because we have another player we'll talk about here in a bit. I do believe Miami is going big game hunting, and I don't see them coming up empty-handed. That's still my prediction of the offseason. I think they still end up with the key player. And I think they'll take whichever key player they can get because it's going to be a clear upgrade from what they currently have. The Pat Riley potential connection isn't a detriment, in my opinion. I think is actually a strength because you want what's going to work best for Kyrie is going to a stable organization. Mm-hmm. I think that helps. Now, there is volatility with, I don't know about it. I'm fine with him and Riley. Him and Jimmy Butler, I don't know. That one's That's dangerous.
A great point. That's a great point.
That one's dangerous. But my pick there for it is going to be the New York Knicks. And the reason why for that is he will be happy there. It's the full Madison Square Garden. It's full him like jumping in with this. I think New York could at least offer a solid package within it. So nothing flashy, but there's some young guys that they could do picks within it, things that could be put together where I think that could work, potentially even complementing a Durant trade. Because in my opinion, if you're moving Kyrie, you're also moving Durant. And so this is part of the full, how does this rebuild or how does everything look under the final composition of what Brooklyn looks like within it? I think this is where you get some of the, like maybe another young player you can work with, Obi Toppin, or along those lines. But I think draft picks that give you something for the future while using Durant more for current. And I think if you put the two together, it puts together a better outlook for Brooklyn in the next 5-7 years. But I think he would thrive in that New York environment. I think that would be a place where this is where Kyrie can be Kyrie and be his team.
New York has some interesting pieces, like you mentioned, R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish, who was brought in recently, Julius Randle, who the salaries would match up, and has been an all-star. Obi Toppin, you said already, Mitchell Robinson as a young player, Emmanuel Quickly, even perhaps some package of those guys. The only reason I have for pause, I guess it's twofold. One, the Knicks just signed Jalen Brunson, and do they have to wait until January 1st? I'd have to go back and check the contract rules for that, or whether a player that was signed as a free agent you can move right away. I know for a lot of re-signings, you got to wait till January 1st if there were bird rights. I forget, honestly, whether a guy off the street free agency unrestricted, you can move that quickly, or whether that may be a December 15th type of deal. So you might not be able to do it right away.
December 15th.
The other question then, and Jalen Brunson plays point guard, so you're not going to put those two together, or maybe you would, but now you're telling Brunson you are gone by December 15th. The only other reason for pause I have is it's the city of New York. It was Kyrie Irving versus the city of New York during COVID. And Archie and I talked about this a few weeks ago when he brought up the idea. Archie is, and I don't know, Dan, if you've heard enough episodes of this, but Archie loathes Kyrie Irving, loathes him, yet would love Kyrie Irving in a New York Knicks uniform. And I see the logic in it for all of the reasons you just said. He is a Madison Square Garden type of player. It would move the needle. It actually makes a lot of sense. Although the idea of Kyrie playing for Tibbs should be scary for everyone involved there. But I can see it. It's just, would he be willing to play in the exact same city that started all of this stuff? It's why I'm going to pick the Miami Heat as my most logical destination. Because if I'm the Nets, no, you're not going to get Bam Adebayo for Kyrie. Banish that thought. But I'll take Tyler Hero. And if I can get Max Strus out of the deal, or I can get Omer Yurtseven, And maybe I take a look at Victor Oladipo. I probably don't want Kyle Lowry because that doesn't make sense as part of my rebuild there. But if I can get a package of those guys, Duncan Robinson, maybe I take a look at. There's enough there to feel like, yes, I'm getting rid of something for 60 cents on the dollar, but it's a ticking time bomb that I just got 60 cents back for. And I hot potatoed a guy that I might have gotten nothing for the next year, especially if he scuttles his own trade value. You know, it makes sense there in Miami, but you're right. There are the concerns about Jimmy Butler. There's the concerns about Pat Riley. Going to LA makes a ton of sense. I just don't understand how the Los Angeles Lakers are going to get Kyrie without giving up multiple draft picks and Russell Westbrook. And even if I'm the Nets, I don't understand why I accept that. Like, I don't understand. Yes, Russell Westbrook only has one more year left, but the idea of Westbrook and Ben Simmons on the same team together, like, you might as well just relegate the Nets out of the NBA for one season because nobody wants to watch that, and there's no possible way that works whatsoever. So I'll go with Miami, but I see your logic with New York. I think the Bulls could be a dark horse, honestly, and make a ton of sense as far as how to get Kyrie in a way that makes sense for Chicago and makes sense for Brooklyn. It's just that backcourt gets really defensively suspect if it's Kyrie and Levine together. Last guy that we're going to talk about, and we're a little bit short on time, so we'll keep this tight. Donovan Mitchell, Utah Jazz. There's going to be a lot of teams that I think are in the hunt for Donovan Mitchell. He's going to be more gettable than Kevin Durant. He's younger, but Mitchell is a guy being paid max money now to be a superstar, and the jury is very much out about whether Mitchell is just a nice star, which is where I believe he is. I think he's kind of maxed out as a player. All-star caliber, for sure. Helpful, for sure. Number one guy, nah. We've seen that in Utah now. So what you can get for him and where you're going to fit him in, there's going to be a lot of phone calls. But people are going to try to heist him away for paying for a starter when they're getting a star. And Utah might be asking for a superstar haul when Mitchell is actually only a star. And that's where this makes it a little bit difficult. So I just want to throw this back to you real quick and say, you know, are there like a top 2 or 3 teams that you think work really well for Mitchell? And I've got my list. If you want me to go first to buy you some time, I can do that too.
Well, I think that there's a precursor to this that needs to be stated because it's gone around the NBA as a massive ripple effect. I don't think Tim Connolly is going to be on anyone's Christmas card list from his fellow comrades in arms here in the NBA. There's a lot of people bashing the amount of first-round picks given and how that has caused a ripple effect on what Utah thinks it can get for Mitchell or for any of the big players involved within it, that they expect at least 4 first-round picks and something along with it, and how that's causing a potential monkey wrench in the whole deal within it. Plus, it gave me a chance to include Minnesota once again in the conversation. But the truth is that does impact things. And where the teams that make sense, again, I keep going back to them because I said I think they're going to end up with at least one superstar that's available this offseason. The Miami Heat, more than Kyrie Irving. Donovan Mitchell makes a ton of sense there. There you could offer a hero, both Lowry maybe for salary, like back in with it, and then the first-round picks. I think there's a lot that makes sense there. I mean, people have mentioned the Knicks as well, but again, after the Brunson move, I'm just not understanding the still targeting of another point guard within it. But Miami's the team that stands out the most to me. What about you?
See, for me, Mitchell makes more sense in New York because predominantly, while he has done some point guard in the NBA, predominantly he's played shooting guard. Mike Conley filled that point guard spot with him. So Mitchell and Brunson in the backcourt makes a lot of sense, even though they're undersized. And if I'm the Utah Jazz, I know that I can't get a bona fide superstar back because that bona fide superstar is not going to want to be alone in Utah during a rebuild. That's why somebody like the LA Clippers, you can't give up Paul George to get Donovan Mitchell because George is a flight risk. So I need a package of a couple of fringe star or upside guys who look like stars if I'm the Jazz, and then I begin to build through the draft. The Knicks could give me that in RJ Barrett and some of those other younger players that we talked about. Maybe Obi Toppin, maybe Mitchell Robinson, maybe Julius Randle, depending on how much you like him, although he's not necessarily young anymore at this point. There's a couple of other teams, though. So if I've got to pick like the big market teams, I'm going to go with Mitchell to New York. You're welcome, Arky, over most of the other options that are here. But there's a few other teams that would look at Donovan Mitchell as the next step. The next, the guy that's going to put them either into the playoffs or winning some playoff rounds now. And they've got the young pieces, multiple young pieces to make it happen. I look at the Charlotte Hornets, for example. They're not going to get rid of LaMelo Ball. No. But Terry Rozier, Kelly Oubre, PJ Washington, Jalen McDaniels, Nick Richards, now a draft pick, Gordon Hayward, maybe going back to Utah. There's some interesting pieces there plus picks to then get a bona fide all-star next to LaMelo Ball, and it's not a terrible return for Donovan Mitchell. Cleveland Cavaliers, similarly. No, they're not going to get rid of Darius Garland. But Karis LeVert, Lauri Markkanen, Jetty Osman, Isaac Okoro. No, they're not going to get rid of Evan Mobley or probably Jared Allen. But there are some picks in the organization there. Maybe that's not enough. Dallas, like Miami, is going to be making phone calls, but the guys they're giving up probably too old for what Utah wants out of this. Just running down the list. Go ahead.
Do you think that that Mitchell could play with SGA in Oklahoma?
Yes, I do, but I don't think that Oklahoma wants to fast forward their process unless it's for a legit Hall of Fame caliber player that changes the entire equation of what they're doing. And Donovan Mitchell doesn't do that. I do think those two could play together, but you run the risk of getting too good too fast and then being a middling team because you're not good enough. They keep those young guys together just long enough to build up even more upside capital to all those draft picks like we talked about, and then you ditch them right before you have to pay them, and you take those next steps, or they look so good that you have no problem paying them the money that it would take to keep that core, which you grew cheaply and efficiently through the draft. So that's why I don't think they make sense. Orlando, they've got some pieces, but I'd feel bad for Donovan Mitchell because that feels like a worse situation than Utah and one that really is unsettled. But there's some young pieces there. You talk about unsettled organizations, the Sacramento Kings. Would I do a straight-up De'Aaron Fox for Donovan Mitchell swap? In a heartbeat, if I'm either team. If I'm the Utah Jazz, I get a young up-and-coming player. I see what I have and I begin to rebuild, but it's a little bit of accelerated. And I'm getting a player for fair value, an all-star caliber guy, maybe even a pick and another young guy out of it. If I'm Sacramento, I'm convincing myself that Donovan Mitchell and Domantas Sabonis are a nice 1-2 all-star punch that I can build around to finally get back to the playoffs. Is that actually a thing and possible? I don't know, but I could talk myself into it because I'm the Kings. And what else are you going to do? The one other team, though, that I do want to mention here is one that came up in the Durant sweepstakes. You loved Durant going to this place. I was not in love with it because of the flight risk potential. But I really love the idea here for adding somebody like Donovan Mitchell, who I think can remain in a small market as long as they're successful. And that's the Toronto Raptors. Because I'm not giving up quite as many pieces or as many assets as I would have to for Durant. Maybe it's close because I'd be conceivably underpaying for Durant and overpaying for Mitchell. But my only concern with the Raptors, Van Vliet's undersized, Mitchell is undersized for his position. Other than that, I have zero concerns about making this type of trade.
They just seem to have the itch to want the piece that can help them make the next step. And I think they're I don't want to say they're trigger happy, but they're pretty close to it of wanting to find something that can try to be a bump in that direction and try to take a swing at something. And he would make sense, not as much as Durant, as far as being a full needle mover. But they don't necessarily need that as much with a true core of a team. That maybe is he enough? That's going to be the question for that front office to consider.
There you have it. Where do you think Donovan Mitchell should go? Leave us your thoughts in the comments section. Again, if you want the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. If you want the video version, it's on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell over there. What about Kevin Durant? We named like half the league as far as potential, landing spots for him. Where do you think he fits best? And of course, Kyrie Irving, I think that list is a whole lot smaller, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Again, Dan Lewig, want to thank you for joining us here on the Detlef Shrimp episode of BBA. Archie Shea will be back at some point, but like we do during the off season, we start to tape about once every other week. We take a little bit of a breather break too. So we're going to enjoy some vacation and some downtime now that Summer League is done. But of course, if there's a Durant signing or a trade, I should say, if Kyrie or Donovan Mitchell gets moved, we will certainly do an emergency episode. Otherwise, we'll see you down the line in just a little bit. And for Dan Lewig, this is Joel Cordes saying thanks again for listening to BBA. We'll be back on in a couple weeks.